Reducing emissions just seems like the most obvious policy, and yet it's met so much resistance. Even as far back as the Rio Earth Summit 30 years ago, President Bush Sr. said the American way of life is not up for negotiation. But that has really been true of all of us in the wealthy, developed world. We've had that attitude. Do you think that now we have to move? I mean, we know we have to move, but are the leaders, are these COP26 summits really fit for purpose? Are they going to deliver the goods on the reduction side? Because I think that's meant to be the low-hanging fruit.
I'm going to answer your question in a slightly roundabout way. The setting up of the Climate Crisis Advisory Group was the attempt I was making to see that we had an agile capability to respond to current situations. And bingo, we set up the group and we have these extreme weather events around the Northern Hemisphere. It gave us a wonderful opportunity to show what we can do in real time. The United Nations process is very rigorous, and I admire the way they do it, but it is actually the opposite. It's not an agile process. So we will produce monthly reports of this kind going into the future, but the IPCC simply can't do that. It has to get the ratification of all of the member states, etc. The same applies to UNFCCC, and hence your question about COP26. The processes of COP26 are so laborious. Imagine the situation where you have 197 countries represented, where on average, each country is represented by 20 officials, which means that we have nearly 4,000 people trying to negotiate a deal over a 2-week period. And believe me, what actually happens, particularly in the first week when there seems to be no hurry anywhere, people make wonderful speeches repeating what they've been saying for the last 10 years. There's no sense of urgency in the procedure by which the operation takes place. In the United Nations, there is also a Security Council. And frankly, I believe that, and this is a new idea, that we need a Security Council for climate change, a United Nations-based Security Council, which should be led by a person of real stature who's recognized around the world to be totally committed to action on climate change, but also in a fair and equitable way. If we had that sort of operation, a Security Council with perhaps no more than 20 members who could meet without having to have a big following gathering of 10,000 or 30,000 people, I think we could manage it. But what I'm really saying is, Nick, we've got a crisis on our hands. We've got a crisis on our hands. The subheading of this report is a global state of emergency. And we're not using these words lightly. I believe we've got 5 years to put in place everything that needs to be done. This includes reduced emissions, removing greenhouse gases that are already there, repairing the Arctic Circle region. We need to get on and find how we can manage it. It's got to be done carefully, but we need to do it quickly. We need universities to put their research effort in. We need finance to operate this. It needs to be treated as a global emergency because our future as a civilization depends on rapid response to the situation.
One thing that came up actually related to this in the interview last week was the suggestion that we need a UN Security Council specifically for climate change. Is that something that you think is a reasonable suggestion, or do you think we already have the bodies in place to deal with it?
I think that any elevation of these issues, whether it's at the UN level or other international organizations, can really be useful just to increase our understanding and to increase the legitimacy of considering these issues, that they're not just, boutique environment issues that are off on the side and we'll worry about them later, but that they're central to understanding security. What impact that's going to have policy-wise, that's what I'm not exactly sure, because it's still going to come down to individual countries and states and communities being able to implement the policies, whether it's increasing resilience or increasing science or coming up with national security strategies. Because I think what we've seen with, say, floods in Europe this summer, these are conditions that Europe just isn't used to dealing with. They've had, a pretty good 1,000 years of pretty stable climate, and suddenly things are changing, and the infrastructure is just not built for it. So I think raising awareness is one thing, but there need to be policy translations as well. So like at the EU level, there probably needs to be some sort of EU commission just for, say, climate infrastructure that deals with how do you tie together energy. And energy transition in Europe is already a very difficult issue, but how do you tie that then to infrastructure and resilience and flooding and everything else?
Thanks again for listening. If you are interested to help support this series and help expand the discussion around climate topics, then please do consider backing my channel via Patreon. It will help me produce more content, and you will also gain access to more expert interviews. It would be great to engage more with audiences too and understand your views on these topics.